Hello there, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI and VR2 Recruiting Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RocketTopInsider.com, and I'm joined by Brandon Martin of VR2 for our post-National Signing Day podcast. Unfortunately, Matt could not join us for this one, but we're hoping to kind of get all three of us on together for a podcast here soon. I think next time we all get together, we'll talk mostly about probably 2021 guys, but we'll keep touching on this 2020 class because there's a lot to kind of dissect about this class. But National Signing Day is now over. Tennessee added two very talented athletes on Wednesday, and four-star athlete D. Beckwith and four-star wide receiver Malachi Weidman. Tennessee got Beckwith. He chose Tennessee over the Gators, and then they also were able to flip Weidman from Florida State, and he also chose Tennessee not just over Florida State, but also over Ole Miss and Oregon, who made late pushes for him as well. As of right now, Tennessee's class ranks number 10 overall in the country on 247 Sports, and it sounds really impressive, but then when you consider that Tennessee is number 10 overall, but only 7th in the SEC in the recruiting rankings, that's just crazy. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that in a second. On Rivals, they had a late update to their rankings last night. Tennessee was 8th, and then now they pushed Tennessee just slightly ahead of Florida, and Tennessee is 7th in the Rivals recruiting rankings overall and 5th in the SEC. So they're ahead of, I think, both Auburn and Florida in the Rivals rankings. I don't care about ESPN. I don't even know where Tennessee is in the ESPN rankings. I don't think most people who listen to this podcast really care about ESPN's recruiting rankings, so I'm not going to look into it. But Tennessee ends up getting 2 more 4-stars yesterday. I think Beckwith is actually a 3-star, I think, on Rivals and the composite, but he's a 4-star on the actual 247 rankings, at least he was. But before we kind of get into, I think we'll talk a little bit about those two specifically here in a second, Brandon, but before we get into that, looking at Tennessee's class, the 23 guys they signed, and then I think you can throw in, they're not technically the recruits you signed in this class, but 2 guys who should be both eligible. One of them for sure will be eligible. The other one, you're really hoping they can be, that they added in transfers this offseason as well. That's technically part of this 2020 class in Cade Mays and Velas Jones Jr. What would you give a grade for this class? Because I look at it as a class that it's one that I think is very, very good. I think last year you had more headliners. I think it was a little more top-heavy last year. Well, you do still have a lot of guys, I think, who are contributors in that class and who are contributors as freshmen, who I think will be starters and contributors moving forward. But you look at the class last season, or last recruiting cycle in the 2019 class, you had 2 5-stars on Darnell Wright and Wanya Morris. You had 2 other top 100 guys with Henry Toa and Quavaris Crouch. And you had a couple other high-related 4-stars, but you was a little more top-heavy in last year's class. This class, you have just a bunch of 4-stars. I think you have 13 on 247. You have a 5-star in Harrison Bailey, and I think 13 other 4-stars on Rivals. It's a lot more, I think, there's more depth to this class. But you also look at it in the fact that you look at who Tennessee had committed at some points in this class. You look at who Tennessee was really high on at some points of this class. B.J. Ojolari was committed to Tennessee at one point. You had the whole Jay Hardy thing. You had Tennessee with having real interest with Rakeem Jarrett, with other guys like Noah Sewell, Spell Smalls, which those I think were a little bit more longer shots. But then you also think of Eric Gilbert, Darnell Washington. You look at the guys Tennessee could have had, you're thinking this class could have been even better. But even for what it is, with this being Tennessee's first winning season since 2016, with this being Pruitt's second year and Pruitt's first winning season at Tennessee, and especially with the way the year started for Tennessee on going 1-4 and 0-2 to start the year, I think this is a very solid class, and I would give it I'm going to say an A- because I'm not going to give it a full A just because, like I mentioned, there were a few guys that really could have sent this class, I think, over the top to an A if you're able to keep a B.J. Ojolari or land one of those other top 5-star guys. And if they get Zach Evans, for example, who we'll kind of touch on here in a second, if they get Zach Evans, I think that might send it over to an A. But including Cade Mays and Velas Jones, I think those are both 2 huge additions to Tennessee's roster. I'm going to give this an A-, and I think this is a very strong class for Jeremy Pruitt and his staff.
As far as a grade goes, I'm going to give this class just a solid A. I think this is a really, really solid class. And when you look at recruiting, you have to look at the talent that you bring in. You have to look at the kind of guys you're getting. But I think you also have to look at the needs of the team. Mm-hmm. And I think very, very importantly for Tennessee, They met all their needs in this class. The one thing you might go, well, did they, didn't they, is going to be tight end, but I think you've got a guy in D. Beckwith that could potentially, you could play him at receiver, you could see him project into that role. So I think you've got that need met. But let's talk about what we felt like Tennessee really needed. You desperately needed an edge rusher in this class. Mm-hmm. That was a huge priority. Yes, you lost B.J. Ojulari to LSU, and that one hurt. B.J. is one of the few guys that you mentioned that I think the start didn't really hurt Tennessee with. And I think of the guys that Tennessee missed on, B.J. was the one that maybe hurt the most. I think he's really going to have a huge impact at LSU. And he really fit what Jeremy Pruitt wanted to do. They wanted him badly. I think missing him is going to hurt. But Morven Joseph is not exactly a consolation prize. This dude is a monster. Mm-hmm. His film is fantastic. He also fits exactly what Jeremy Pruitt wants to do. I believe he's going to be a plug-and-play guy. You're going to throw him in that spot and just watch him thrive. And they feel like Tyler Barron is going to be able to play that role as well. So you needed the edge rushers. You got two guys that they feel very, very confident are able to step into that role. You needed some help on the defensive line. You add guys like Dominic Bailey, like Amari Thomas. Again, those two guys are huge playmakers. They are immediate impact players that Tennessee might actually be able to think about redshirting, which we've not said in a long, long time about Tennessee, but they may have the option of redshirting two guys that are that good and allow them to develop because they have so many juniors and seniors, mostly seniors, on this upcoming roster. You might be able to save them a year of eligibility, but those are immediate impact and huge impact guys. You needed to address the interior of the offensive line. I feel like Tennessee did that very, very well with high-end players that are going to help there. And you desperately needed a quarterback. You got one guy who is a lock to play quarterback. You got two other guys who are going to get a look at that position, but obviously Harrison Bailey is the big one there. I think maybe of everybody in the country, I think Harrison Bailey may fit what Tennessee's offense is better than anyone else. And you needed help at wide receiver, and you pulled a really nice receiver haul after yesterday. Mm-hmm. A really nice receiver haul. Inside linebacker became a big issue, and you addressed that in spades. So not only did Tennessee get good players, they got good players in the positions they needed good players, and they needed guys that could contribute early. And the film on all these guys that Tennessee got is really good. I don't feel like there are a lot of reaches in this class, and that's a good feeling. I'm looking through these guys and I'm going, man, these guys look good. And we keep hearing that Tennessee staff and Jeremy Pruitt's staff are very high on senior tape, senior film, and Tennessee's class has got a lot of late risers in it that had really good senior film. It's a good class. Like I said, I'm going to give it an A. B.J. Ojulari hurt. That was a tough one to lose. Eric Gilbert was another one that hurt, but I think Tennessee's start took them out of it with that. I think it put them on a back foot with Darnell Washington a little bit, and I think it really hurt them with Noah Sewell and Savell Smalls and Rakeem Jarrett. I think the way Tennessee started lost a lot of those battles before they ever really got started. But I think those were guys that pushed this class to an A+. This is a really deep class full of quality players. It's going to have a pretty high grade.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, the only reason I didn't give it an A was because it was missing out. But I could be, I think, easily argued into an A because not just of all the guys that we just mentioned here who they signed, but like I said, the guys you brought in as transfers with Cade Mays and Velus Jones Jr., those are two guys. Well, Jones, I'm going to be intrigued to see what he can do as a receiver. I think if you're bringing him in as a grad transfer, you're not just going to use him as a kick return guy. You're going to use him as a receiver. I think T. Martin, the best year that Jones had at USC, Martin was his offensive coordinator, his receivers coach, and then Martin obviously left USC, and then last year Jones had a big regression in the receiving core. And you get part of it was he got passed up by some younger, more talented players, but I think him getting reunited with T. Martin is going to be interesting to see what can those two do together. Cade Mays, if he's eligible, I mean he's a starter for Tennessee. There's no question about it. and he's a very good starter. I think Pruitt mentioned that he thinks he's one of the best offensive linemen in the country. I mean, he was coming out of high school, and he proved against at Georgia to be very, very good. Brady, you mentioned the wide receiver haul. I heard an interesting conversation on the Swain event on Thursday morning talking about, is this the best receiver haul since Swain's actual, when he came in 2003, when you had him, Meacham, Brett Smith, that were all kind of all-American type guys coming out of high school. And the only other class that, kind of the modern recruiting era that they could look at that really compared as far as, at least on paper, because obviously these guys haven't done anything yet at Tennessee. Jalen Hyatt, Jimmy Callaway, D. Beckwith, Malachi Weidman, they haven't done anything yet, so it's not necessarily fair to compare, I guess, kind of past classes, because you have a little bit of a bias looking into those past classes saying, well, these guys, like Denarius Moore, for example, he was only a 3-star, but he obviously had a very good career. But coming out of high school, he wasn't as hyped up as some other guys in that class that he was signed with. I personally think this is the best receiver haul Tennessee's had since the 2010 class. That's what they said too. In that 2010 class, obviously you had Justin Hunter and Derek Rogers, and if Derek had been able to keep his head on straight, who knows what kind of I think he probably could have set some records at Tennessee. But those are both two guys who finished with over 1,000 yards in a season before. I think Hunter did. I know Derek obviously did, but those are two. If Hunter doesn't have his injury issues in his sophomore season, I mean, he's a guy that we saw the explosive ability he had before that. Even when he came back in his junior year, after that, he was an explosive athlete still. But I think this is probably, to me, Tennessee's best group of receivers they've brought in since that 2010 group of getting Derek and Justin Hunter, and I don't think it's particularly close. You look between 2010 and 2020. I don't think another group of guys you're looking at that Tennessee's brought in at the receiving corps really even compares to what Tennessee brought in with this class.
No, and not only is it a class full of good receivers that are incredibly talented, it's also Tennessee kept their toolbox full. Mm-hmm. They, in this class, they have a receiver for whatever job they want to run. You need a big possession receiver who's going to body out guys and grab balls and be tough to get down and get you first downs. That's going to be D. Beckwith's cup of tea when they put him on the edge. Mm-hmm. You want a polished route runner who can hurt you all over the field and set you up and demand double coverage all the time. Let me introduce you to Jalen Hyatt. You need a guy who's just going to be a burner and an absolute nightmare to try to tackle when the ball's in his hands. A guy to just get the ball to him on a bubble screen and try to get him space. That's going to be Jimmy Callaway's cup of tea early. You get down in the red zone, and we're talking about I just need to throw it up to a guy. And Tennessee's red zone offense has really struggled. I'm looking for a guy. I need a guy to go high point the ball. There's not going to be a defensive back that Tennessee plays that can out jump Malachi Weidman.
Man.
I'm wondering, did you get the highlight that I tagged you in on Twitter before we
yes,
started this?
I did, and also just watching his film on Wednesday when I was doing his Impact Report stuff when he was, before he ended up announcing for Tennessee. I think I mentioned either in his commitment article or the Impact Report that to me he is the perfect jump ball receiver. I mean, you think, look what Marquez Callaway did, look what Juwan Jennings could do for Tennessee as jump ball guys. I mean, Weidman's going to pick up right where they left off, and I think even be potentially better than even what. I mean, Callaway was a ridiculously good jump ball receiver. Weidman's just a physical freak of an athlete. I mean, he's a guy that I don't know what I'm more excited to see, him on the football field or see what he can do potentially in basketball. As Rick Barnes said today, though, football's going to be their first priority. That's what they're on scholarship. But man, Weidman is just one of the most gifted athletes I've ever seen coming out of high school.
The highlight that I'm talking about, his high school team, Venice High School in Florida, is throwing a fade route, and he is triple covered. Mm-hmm. There are 3 guys on him. The defense said, you can throw a pass down here to anyone but Malachi Weidman, but we're not letting you throw it to Weidman. Well, they threw it to Weidman anyway, and he is a foot and a half above the top of the heads of any of the defenders. He outjumped them by that much. I mean, he's a foot and a half above their heads and catches this ball out of the sky for a touchdown. There are just not many guys that are able to do that. Of course, he's going to play basketball for Tennessee. He's going to make an impact for Rick Barnes' team. primarily because this kid is an insane leaper and finisher. His leaping ability is, even by basketball standards, is unreal. Mm-hmm. Now you're talking about having a 6'5" kid at wide receiver out on the edge that can jump like that. He's going to be a problem in the red zone because a guy like, whether it's Jarrett Garantano, whether it's Harrison Bailey, whether it's Brian Maurer, whoever Tennessee's quarterback ends up being, this is one of those situations where you just throw it up and let him go get it. Because he's either going to catch it or it's going to land in the stands. Those are the only two options.
So I've been looking for his vertical leap because it wasn't on like his 247 profile or anything like that. So I found it here on his huddle. This is definitely unofficial. His huddle is not necessarily the most accurate when it comes to sometimes having times and bench presses and things like that. But with this listed here, I honestly this vertical doesn't shock me. I could believe it's real. On Huddle, it's listed at a 41.8 inches on his vertical leap. I mean, I can believe it too. I really could.
I believe that. I believe that. Having watched the football and basketball highlights, I believe that without blinking.
Yeah, this kid is. I mean, he is the most gifted athlete I think Tennessee has, and that's. I mean, this class honestly is full of a lot of gifted athletes, whether it's Jimmy Holiday or Jalen Hyatt or Jimmy Callaway. Morven Joseph is a very, very athletic person, and I know you're a big fan of how athletic and good Amari Thomas is too. I mean, this class to me, just going down the list and looking at guys who have a lot of positional versatility, DAmico Slaughter, for example. I mean, Devontae Spraggins is strong. I mean, that kid is one of the strongest offensive linemen coming out of high school that you're going to see. This class is just filled with a lot of really, really good athletes, just period.
If Javonte Spraggins gets a hold of you, you're going for a ride. Mm-hmm. That kid is a people mover. If he gets his hands inside of you, forget it. Just you are moved. You're going where he wants to. I think he's one of the sleepers of this class. Mm-hmm. The guy that he's rated much higher on Rivals than he is on 247. But the guy who may be the sleeper of this class is DAmico Slaughter.
I agree.
100%. Because my goodness, what a hitter. He can cover, but great day he just clocks people over the middle. He plays defense as a safety like you saw good safeties play in the 80s. He doesn't necessarily go up and knock the ball away from you. He knocks you away from the ball, and he does it clean. He's going to lay those hits, and he's not going to get called for targeting a lot. It's when you watch his highlights, it's good form tackles. It's tackles that are not going to be penalized. It's leading with the shoulder. It's hitting in the chest. It's hitting in the strike zone. But he has a knack for timing those big hits where the instant your fingertips touch the ball, he's pressing your sternum against your spine. And I think he's going to be – he fits what Jeremy Pruitt wants to me. I think he's a Jeremy Pruitt guy. He's going to set that tone on defense on the back end that Pruitt wants to set, that if you're going to throw over the middle on this team, you're going to pay for it.
I'm curious to hear your answer on this, Brandon, and I'm kind of struggling with it myself, and it was one that coming into this podcast I thought would be a good discussion point. Obviously, the crown jewel of this class, even if Tennessee does land Zach Evans, it's going to be Harrison Bailey. He's a premier quarterback. He's one of the top 5 quarterbacks coming out of this cycle. Even if Tennessee gets 5-star Zach Evans, who's technically rated higher than Harrison Bailey, Bailey's still the crown jewel of this class because he's a quarterback, and those are just so important. And especially if it could be a program-changing type of quarterback like Bailey has the potential to be, excluding discounting the fact that I think if Zach Evans, if you get him, I think he's obviously second choice behind Bailey. But if you had to look at this class, Brandon, and excluding Harrison Bailey, and he's the obvious crown jewel, who's the number 2 guy that you think is the most talented or whatever it is, most excited about? I don't care kind of how you quantify it. Who's the number 2 guy in this class that is, I guess, the second jewel in that set for you? Because I could probably put it to, there are probably 3 guys I'm having trouble narrowing it down to, and I have a feeling I think I know where you're going to go. But I mean, you look at Keyshawn Lawrence, look at guys like Amari Thomas, Malachi Weidman. I think those 3 guys to me it's hard to kind of pick, and I don't know that you could be wrong picking either of those three as far as the next guy to be, the second jewel in this class.
Tennessee really did a nice job of pulling in a lot of really good talent. I think as highly rated as 2 or 3 of Tennessee's guys are, Tennessee had several guys take big jumps in the recruiting rankings. There's a few guys that I still think are underrated. But the guy who's going to be the second jewel to me because of the position that he plays and what he brings to the table is going to be Amari Thomas. I think Amari is... When you plug him into the defensive line and into the scheme that Pruitt wants to run, I think he is such an unreal athlete for his size. He's so big, so quick, so strong, so aggressive. He's intelligent. He's going to learn the scheme. He's going to be a leader on this defense. There are so many good things I can say about this kid. You don't find guys that size that move like he does. You don't find guys who have the technique options that he is going to typically play as a 3-4 who can just rush the passer like he can. These 3-4 defensive ends are not typically great pass rushers, especially the bigger ones. Mm-hmm. Thomas is. You don't see a lot of 300-pound guys that explode like he does and uses his hands. You don't see a lot of 300-pound guys who can rush the passer like a 240-pound defensive end on a speed rush, just dipping their shoulder and beating you to the corner. Amari Thomas can do that. And he can do it to really good offensive tackles as well. I've watched him do this to a guy in Marcus Henderson who wound up signing with Arkansas. He's one of their big signings. He's still rated as a 4-star offensive lineman on Rivals. He was an All-American. And I watched Amari Thomas beat him on a cold speed rush around the corner. Just dipped his shoulder and went. You don't find those guys, and then you don't find guys that deliver the blows like Amari Thomas does. I think he's going to be a tone setter for this Tennessee defense, and I think he's one of those guys that's going to give Jeremy Pruitt the opportunity to scheme and be a little more complex on defense because he can do more than most other people. So you can go, well, I'm going to overload the defense to this side and bring pressure because you can't block everybody, or I'm going to make it look like I'm coming to the other side and I'm going to try to get Amari a one-on-one matchup and see if he can beat you from a place you don't normally get beat and get pressure on your quarterback. I think he's a big chess piece. I think he's one of the guys you can build a defense around. And I think that's where I will go with the second crown jewel, but there's a lot of guys in this class that are very talented, and I think maybe more talented they're getting credit for.
I knew Amari Thomas was going to be your pick, or I had a strong suspicion he was going to be your pick. We've heard you too many times on this podcast rave about Amari Thomas to for me not to think that was going to be who you're going to pick here. But I'm honestly, I might be inclined to agree with you with Thomas because, like you said, the position that he's going to play and what Tennessee's going to need moving forward. Maybe not necessarily this season as a true freshman for him with that line because you're returning a lot of guys, or you're returning everyone from this past season. And Emmett Gooden's going to be healthy, hopefully for him. Aubrey Solomon's going to be back, and you have younger guys you can kind of put in there and rotate in and out for the other spot too. But moving forward, I think Thomas is a definite. I'm almost going to choose him. I think just because I think this kid has day one starter potential. I think to me Keyshawn Lawrence is the second one, and Thomas is it's almost like a 2A 2B in my opinion.
Yep.
Keyshawn Lawrence is really good, and I think he has the potential to come in with there being really both safety spots are kind of up for grabs. You had Najee Warrior graduate. Javon Flowers has had issues staying healthy. If he's healthy, I think Flowers can nail down a spot because he's been a good player. But you have two spots up for grabs. Obviously, Jalen McCullough is going to fight for that. I'd be curious to see who else stays at safety. What do they do with Tyus Fields, Aaron Beasley? Those guys are both kind of versatile as well. As we just mentioned, DAmico Slaughter, I think he could fit more as a star guy. But you also have Sean Schemberger there, so what happens there? But I think Keyshawn Lawrence, one of those two safety spots, I would be kind of surprised at this point if he doesn't come in. And if he's not starting day one, that's one thing. But I would be shocked by at some point this season he isn't starting at safety for Tennessee as a true freshman. That's the reason I'm picking him as number 2 is because I think, as you said, Amari Thomas has a very high ceiling. And I think he's a very good player, obviously a top 100 overall player in the country coming out of this class. And I think he's Tennessee's best defensive lineman they brought in. They brought in a couple guys. I think Dominic Bailey is being slept on a little bit. I think he's very good, but I think Thomas is the best defensive lineman potentially that Pruitt has signed as a I guess just as a recruit, not bringing in as a transfer, but actually signed as a recruit that so far in his tenure at Tennessee. And Gooden, I think Gooden's a good one too, but he's a JUCO guy. It's a little different. But coming out of high school, I think Thomas might be the best defensive lineman that Pruitt has signed so far. But Keyshawn Lawrence to me is my pick. I just think he's a guy who's going to come in, make an immediate impact. Even if he doesn't start, he's going to make an immediate impact, I think, at least in a depth chart on special teams too. But I definitely think he's a guy that has potential day one starter ability.
I think Keyshawn's going to start somewhere in the secondary before it's over, and
because he could be corner too. Think about that.
They've talked with him about playing corner. One of the reasons Tennessee was so high on him, and he has the skill set to do it, Keyshawn Lawrence can play any position in the secondary you want to put him in, and there are not many of those guys out there. But even at an SEC level, Keyshawn Lawrence is able to play any secondary position Tennessee wants to put him in. He's going to start somewhere before the season's over. They're not going to be able to keep him off the field if he's healthy. I think his most natural spot is at safety, but they like him as a corner. So that's going to be interesting to watch. But he's going to nail down a starting job somewhere in that defensive back end before the season's over.
I think to me, one kind of big thing I want to get here before we kind of move on a little bit to talk about where Tennessee stands in the SEC in this class. Another thing I'm going to think is it's going to be interesting. I guess not really in spring practices because you're not going to have a lot of those guys there. You only have 4 early enrollees, and the only one of those 4 I think could switch positions would be Jimmy Holiday, and I'll be curious to see what happens with him. But there are a lot of guys in this class that we were just talking about earlier are very versatile and athletic. I look at Jimmy Holiday, maybe Jimmy Callaway too, but Lenith Whitehead, DAmico Slaughter, Tamarion McDonald, Jabari Small, T. Hodge. Those are all guys I could see playing, multiple positions. I could see them switching. Some of them maybe switching to the different side of the ball. Where look at maybe Lenith Whitehead for example. But there are multiple guys, or even T. Hodge. But there are several guys in this class who, the position they're listed at right now, or the position they're going to get a shot at first in the spring or in the fall, or technically over the summer. I don't know that that's the position that they're going to end up playing at Tennessee, and Pruitt likes to kind of move guys around, but he obviously leaves it up to the players and kind of lets them choose what they want to do. If they don't want to move somewhere, he's not going to force them. But I'm going to be very curious to see how many of these guys Tennessee signed in this 23-man signing class end up playing a different position by the time they're sophomores or juniors or in their second and third season, whether they're redshirt or not. I think you're going to see probably, I'd say at least 3, if not 4, of the guys Tennessee signed in this class play a different position by the time they graduated when they were first brought in here.
Look, if Jeremy Pruitt wanted to try Harrison Bailey at linebacker, I'm not going to be surprised because he believes that everybody can play defense.
Hey, I think he said that on he said that about somebody that he liked to think he could play linebacker. I don't remember who it was on signing day, but or the early signing period. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, he's going to try everybody on defense. I think that he feels like has a shot at it, but he likes signing versatile guys. When Jeremy Pruitt came in, we didn't really know what to expect with him recruiting for himself, with his staff. His first class, it was kind of tough to tell what it was. It was the first year of the early signing period. He came in so late in the process. It was such a mess. He was really just kind of trying to hold the bits of the class that he had together and throw together what he could. Last season we saw him take some versatile guys, but we really saw him try to shore up the immediate needs and prioritize the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I think this season he had some needs, but this was the first year he was going, okay, we're in pretty good shape. I'm not in top-down rebuild. I have to change the identity of to make this team even competitive. I've kind of got my team in place, and now I can start pulling in pieces and meeting needs. And we've seen him. He likes versatile guys. He likes guys that can play multiple positions. He likes guys that can move around and that he can move around. Some of these guys, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and Zach Evans is going to make a big impact on that because if Tennessee lands Zach Evans, the running back room is going to have some serious changes. You could see 1-2 transfers. You could see nobody transfer. You could see some guys move to linebacker. You could see someone move to receiver. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how that pans out because he could change the whole complexion of this running back room, and he could be the guy who sends a lot of guys scattering and into different positions. If you land a Zach Evans, I really have a hard time thinking Tennessee is going to keep Laneith Whitehead at running back.
Yeah,
I know he wants to get a look there, but if they get Evans, I think he's probably going to wind up playing linebacker. Pruitt thinks T. Hodge can play linebacker. He likes T. Hodge. He thinks he can play there. Jabari Small, they feel like can be a slot receiver if he needs to be, especially early in a crowded running back room. They feel like he can help the team there, much like he did in high school. So those are guys that are going to move. D. Beckwith is a guy that Beckwith they have talked about could get a shot at quarterback. They really like Beckwith in the Juwan Jennings role, and his coach at one of his coaches at Florence was in an interview yesterday. He was formerly a coach at Ravenwood, and he said, we coached against Juwan when he was at Blackman, and he said D reminds me more of Juwan Jennings than anyone else I've seen. Their body types are very similar. They're both very good basketball players. They're both big, strong receivers that are tough. They're going to be tough to tackle, but they both played quarterback in high school. I think they're very similar. They like D in that role. They like him at wide receiver. He could play tight end. He could get a look at quarterback. Jimmy Holiday, man. This quarterback room is going to be interesting. The quarterback room is going to depend on who do you see transfer? Does anybody transfer? Is Kasim Hill healthy? Do they want to put Kasim Hill and give him a look at tight end? Because that's been on the table, is looking at Kasim Hill potentially as a tight end. Do they want to leave him at quarterback? Who leaves? Jimmy Holiday, I think Jimmy Holiday could fight for the quarterback job. I think he could genuinely come in and fight for the quarterback job. Now, I think it's going to be Harrison Bailey's job to lose, but they like Jimmy Holiday as a quarterback. If that quarterback room is really, really crowded, I think Jimmy Holiday also might have a faster path to the field as a wide receiver. And you're talking about another dynamic athlete there to go with guys like Callaway and Hyatt. So there are a lot of moving parts in this class. Bryson Eason's another one with the size that he has added. Middle linebacker, outside linebacker. Do you put him at defensive end and let him play kind of what Crouch does? So there's Keyshawn Lawrence, again, we talked about, can play all over the back end of the secondary. Tamarion McDonald is a guy you can move all over the place. I feel like Martavius French is a guy who can play any linebacker position you put him in. So there's a lot of versatility in this class, and I think Jeremy Pruitt's going to have the option once this class is full, because I don't think it's done yet. But once this class is full and is done, he's going to be able to get into summer camp and start playing guys, letting guys work, and be able to move people around to put the best team together that he has. He's going to have the option to shuffle everything around to get the most depth and to get the most playmakers in the most advantageous positions. And he's going to have some depth. Tennessee's going to have some depth at important positions for the first time in a long time, with really good players in the two deep. Tennessee's going to have a lot of good players this season that aren't going to see the field much. And that's not happened in a long time. And that's the mark of another really good recruiting class. And I'll make this next point when we talk about the classes. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. I was actually, you mentioned the fact that you don't think Tennessee's done. I wanted to touch on that, actually, before we move forward talking about the classes in the SEC, because we both think, obviously, Zach Evans is the big name, but Tennessee would save a spot for him. Tennessee has, they can play around with the numbers a little bit. I think they can back count maybe both Cade Mays and Velas Jones, but I know for sure they plan on at least back counting one if they get able to pick up Evans. But we've also talked about in this podcast the chance of Tennessee pursuing the grad transfer tight end out of UCLA. I think Tennessee would also go to the grad transfer route if a guy pops up that's an outside linebacker or a pass rusher that puts his name in the transfer portal this spring. I'm with you. Whether it's Zach Evans or another grad transfer or transfer just in general, I don't think we're done seeing Tennessee add some guys yet. I think we're going to see at least one more addition, whether it's Evans or a grad transfer. But I would be shocked if there's two. But I think you'll see between now and I guess the summer, I think you'll see at least one more guy be added to Tennessee's class at this point, because I don't think they're done. They have room to add at least one more technically, so I think they will do that, because I think this, Pruitt and them, I don't think they'll leave any stone unturned. They're not one to leave a spot open. I think they're going to try to fill every single spot they can.
Well, it looks like they're going to be able to take up to 2 more guys. Now, obviously, they've got one of those for Evans, is what they want. That if they get Evans, that last spot is going to be really interesting. If they don't get Evans, the last 2 spots are going to be really interesting, because they could go the grad transfer market. If they miss on Evans, there are some really good running backs in the transfer portal right now. Now they're not grad transfers. It's guys that are going to have to sit for a year. But if you're Tennessee, you have Ty Chandler, you have Tim Jordan, you've got Eric Gray, you're adding Jabari Small, you're adding T. Hodge, potentially Laneith Whitehead, however all that shakes out. You feel pretty good about your running back room this season. So you could take one of these high-profile transfers if you miss on Evans, redshirt him and let him sit for a year, and then bring him in and have him next season. That's definitely an option that's on the table for them. They would like to add another pass rusher if they could. They'd like to do something at tight end. Pruitt has also done a really good job in his time at Tennessee. They usually pull somebody out of some kid that gets the grades up late or slipped through the cracks or nobody knew about because they played single A ball in the middle of nowhere, and they seem to find somebody every year way after signing day that they add. The most notable guy they added was Bryce Thompson that way.
Yep.
Bryce Thompson I don't think signed until March or April.
I believe, if I remember writing articles and stuff about him, I believe it was April when he officially actually was announced or signed with Tennessee.
I mean, it was months after signing day when they picked him up, and he was a four-star athlete, dynamic athlete. You have some of those guys in every class, and Jeremy Pruitt is very adept. He and his staff are very adept at finding those guys and bringing them in. Another one they added late, I think this was in his first year, was Jarius Abercrombie. Abercrombie played at a very small school in Alabama. He is a massive offensive lineman, and he's not played a lot at Tennessee yet, but I think he's a guy that figures in before his career is over. I don't think Tennessee's done. If they can potentially take 2 more, they're going to take 2 more. Obviously, the hope and the feeling right now is that one spot is going to be for Evans. I think for the moment, Tennessee's probably the leader right there, but who knows? That changes about every 20 minutes. So, who knows? That's going to be one to keep an eye on. But that other spot will be interesting, because do you go to the grad transfer market and take a 1-year rental to try to make an immediate impact in fill a need this year? Do you take a regular transfer who may have 2 or 3 years left but has to sit out this year, or do you kind of try to do what Pruitt has done in the past and put his staff on the ground, scour some tape, try to find somebody that slid through the cracks or had grade issues or looked like they were going to go to JUCO and then turned it around at the last minute because the grades pulled up or whatever questions were answered or they get discovered? It will be interesting, but I do think that last spot is going to be a surprise for people, because I think Tennessee is going to fill both, and they'll look at the transfer market. But I wouldn't be shocked if it's a high school guy that no one has really heard of much or that has kind of slipped through. I think that's one of the things Pruitt and his staff are noted for and are so good at.
Really quickly here, to wrap up the podcast and talk about Tennessee's 2020 signing class. As I mentioned earlier, you can be ranked in the top 10 in the entire country in your recruiting rankings for the class and still be kind of halfway in the barely in the top half of the SEC. And that's been a case for Tennessee before. You look at past classes with Butch Jones, and they were having top 15, top 10 classes and still finishing like 6th or 7th in the SEC. Like I said, Tennessee on 247 is ranked 10th overall, but 7th in the SEC. On Rivals, 7th overall, but 5th in the SEC. Brandon, they're behind or right on par with, Florida is essentially what they're, looking at all the rankings. They're right behind Florida. We're on, right on par with them on both rivals in 247. To me, I think the big question that fans will have is, I don't think you can question the fact that this class is a good class because, as we talked about earlier, we both, gave them that A range as an overall class. But really quickly here, to close out the podcast, how much ground did Tennessee really make up in the SEC when you look at the fact that, I don't think they really made up any ground necessarily on Alabama and Georgia, who both, still had top 3 classes, and, LSU had a top 5 class too. But did Tennessee make up any ground on Florida? Because obviously Tennessee did get Beckwith from Florida, and Florida missed on a few guys on National Signing Day as well. They obviously brought in a lot of big transfers this offseason again. But how much ground do you actually think Tennessee made up in the SEC? Because I think they separated themselves more from the South Carolinas and the Kentuckys and things like that. I think you're putting more space between you and the teams that you've struggled to beat, that you shouldn't be struggling to beat over the last few years. But I don't know how much more ground Tennessee's made up on, the Floridas and the Georgias in the SEC at this point.
An important thing to consider when you're looking at how much ground Tennessee makes up with their last 2 classes, and I think this is a really important point. Georgia and Florida have recruited higher classes than Tennessee in the past, but I want you to look at the attrition that has come out of those classes. It's the same thing that happened. It's the same thing that happened to Tennessee when they were with Butch Jones. Tennessee had some really good classes, but they lost a third of the guys in them, and it usually was a lot of the top third guys in them that transferred out or got hurt or medically retired. Tennessee didn't keep a lot of those guys. They had guys transfer, leave early, a lot of that. Georgia has lost a ton of talent to attrition like that. Guys transferring, leaving early for the draft. That has been a bit of an issue for them. Now, they've recruited at a really, really high level. A lot of that takes care of itself. You're able to reload. You've got another talented guy to step up. But I don't care how talented you are. Georgia just lost 9 starters off their offense. And there are reports that George Pickens may have academic issues and may have issues with class. And if they lose him, that's 10 guys off their offense from last season that are gone that started for them. Now, I don't...
Who would be the one starter? Is it offensive lineman guy?
No, I think it was the tied in... No.
No, because you're losing Eli Wolf. Although, I guess, what's his face? Gosh, I wouldn't even know who their other starter is that they would be returning at this point.
I think it's their tight. I think it was their tight end. It was a tight end or one of the offensive linemen. But you're talking about losing 9, and if you have the issues with Pickens, you're about losing 10 guys off one side of the ball that were starters, not that played, that were starters for you. I don't care how well you recruit. That hurts. That's tough to replace. Florida's had some of the same issues. Florida has had a lot of attrition. Florida last year, let's not forget, Florida's class last year finished just ahead of Tennessee, and that was a big selling point for them. And then they had like 7 guys that didn't make it to spring practice out of that class. Several of them, they're top guys. When you go back and pull those guys out of Florida's class, because, they signed them, but they never played a snap for Florida. When you go back and look at that, all of a sudden Florida's class drops down into the to the 15s or so, and Tennessee's is in the top 10. So the Vols have done a good job under Pruitt of keeping the guys they brought in. I think that's really important to note. The guys that Pruitt has brought in, for the most part, they have kept. And they've kept them in. And Jeremy Pruitt has done a really good job of, if he recruits someone, it's to get somebody that fits his system. It's not just because they're highly rated. It's because they're highly rated or they're rated well, but they have the body type and the skill set to plug into what he wants to do. In Jeremy Pruitt's mind, if you're a 280-pound offensive tackle and you're very athletic and you're very lean and you're a good tackle and you're rated high, that's great. But if I can get a guy who's 310, 315, maybe rated a little bit lower, but 310, 315, pretty close to as athletic, solid in pass blocking, and can maul you in the running game, Pruitt's going to take the bigger guy, even though he's rated lower, because he fits what he wants to do. you saw a lot of this with Butch Jones going to get the highest rated guys that he could.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that because you're going, well, we want to get the best athletes and the best players that we can. But if you bring guys in that don't fit what you want to do, you don't get that maximum potential out of them. I think Jeremy Pruitt has done a really good job, and the whole staff has, of evaluating guys and bringing in players that fit into what they want to do. Georgia is kind of notorious for taking the highest rated guys they can get. Now they have their targets and they do a good job on that, but there come points where Georgia's going to go get whoever the highest rated guy on the board is they think they can get. Florida has had an issue keeping guys out of trouble under Dan Mullen. Mississippi State had an issue keeping guys out of trouble under Dan Mullen. When Mullen was the offensive coordinator at Florida before, they had an issue of keeping guys out of trouble under Mullen and Urban Meyer. I mean, Florida's going to have some attrition out of their classes. They always do. I think Tennessee's made up some ground here, and I think it may have been the Swain event that made this point. It was the Swain event or it was Fox Sports Knoxville, I'm not sure which, that was talking about the two teams that Tennessee really needs to look at. You really want to look at comparing yourselves with right now are going to be A&M and Florida, because those are programs that got new coaches about the same time you did, even though they got them for different reasons. Mullen was a guy at Florida that Tennessee looked very hard at hiring. Mm-hmm. It's also important to note that neither one of those programs were in the mess that Tennessee was in.
Right.
And when you look on rivals, right now Tennessee is sandwiched right between A&M and Florida. On 247, I know they're right behind Florida. They're right behind Florida, and A&M's just a little ahead of them. If Tennessee lands Zach Evans on 247, they'll jump Florida. Just barely, but they will. So you're right there with those teams, but you're bringing in guys that make an impact, that fit what you want to do, and you're keeping those guys in your system. And I think that matters a lot. Landing Harrison Bailey is going to make Tennessee up a lot of ground too, because the quarterback play has hurt the Vols. And you've got a guy in Harrison Bailey that everybody believes in. You've got Jimmy Holiday, who they feel really good at quarterback. I think Tennessee helped their quarterback room a lot in this class. If Harrison Bailey comes in and does what Tennessee coaches and fans believe he's capable of, and what his film certainly looks like he's capable of doing, if he comes in and plays like that, Tennessee's going to make up a lot of ground on those programs, because they will have found their quarterback, and I think it could unlock a lot in this offense.
Well, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think you pretty much put what I was going to say into words as well. And
sorry,
I think no, you're good. That's a good point. I think that's a really good way to end this podcast. Is this class very solid. I think it's on paper at least looks like the best class that Pruitt has brought in at Tennessee so far, and even then it could have been better. And I expect 2021 to. I assume 2021 is going to be even better, because you look at some of the guys Tennessee's in on for this upcoming cycle, and the needs they're going to have in this cycle, and kind of who they're recruiting and everything. And as long as Tennessee doesn't have another disastrous start to their 2020 season, I would assume things will go better for Tennessee just kind of consistently in this 21 class as well. But I think it's a good place to end here. I think everyone is pretty excited about the 2020 class, especially with the way Tennessee ended it on National Signing Day, and with the potential of Zach Evans. And there's not really an update to give there on him. We'll see if anything happens. There's rumors he was going to do some kind of announcement on Thursday. We're recording this. It's like 6:30 at this point. He hasn't done anything. I don't think he'll do anything today. He probably won't do anything until March. I think he wants to take another visit at least. So I don't think he'll make a decision or announcement. But we'll see, I guess. But Brandon, I think that's a good place to end it. You all are at VR2.site. They are at _VR2_ on Twitter. Check them out at VR2 on Instagram and Facebook. We are RockyTopInsider.com. Check us out, Rocky Top Insider, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And a lot of you are probably listening to the podcast here on YouTube. So thank you for that, and please leave comments below, like this post, and subscribe to our channel as well. Check out all their stuff. Sign up for the VR2's Insider Notebook. They do a great job over there. Matt especially will bring a lot of info and interesting information on guys Tennessee's targeting and whatnot as well. So be sure and check everything out at VR2.site and RockyTopInsider.com. Thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of the RTI and VR2 Recruiting Podcast.